Hello everyone and welcome to supplement number 2 for Shadow Man. This time we're going to be taking a look at the backstory of the game as presented in the manual and the official strategy guide. Mostly the strategy guide because it contains the same information as the instruction booklet, but as opposed to the instruction booklet, which is in black and white, the strategy guide is in full color. So we're gonna skip over the installation and other requirements and instructions. Alright, so let's begin with the introduction, with a poem of Dr. Victor Batrakian. This is the dead side, the wasteland, the nothing, beyond the bone-backed gates. Here the true darkness at the heart of all things is made real. What we see in death's dominion is as void as a dead man's gaze, as cold as the light from a dying star. This is a place beyond death, where every soul that has ever shuffled off this mortal coil finds its spiritual home. It is a place that has no boundaries, no hope, no past and no future, trapped as it is in an unending present. A country of the dead, where the massed ranks of billions upon billions of souls range across a limitless expanse to a dead horizon, shuffling through the echoing halls of vast, funereal places, trudging over blasted plains, putrid with morbid vegetation. This is the place known as Deadside. For many thousands of years, the Shadow Men have protected the world of the living against threats crossing over from the spiritual plane known as Deadside, the place where everyone goes, without exception, when they die. Michael Leroy is the current heir to the mysteries of this ancient lineage, bearer of the mark of the Mask of Shadows. When darkness falls, he becomes the walker between the worlds, immortal voodoo warrior, taker of souls, lord of Deadside, the Shadow Man. This last part is what Shadow Man himself recounts on the introduction to the game before the title screen, and it's a pretty good way to introduce the player to the concept of Deadside, especially those of us who live in Europe and didn't have access to the Shadow Man comics and all of that. It also serves as a way to create images in your mind to prepare you for what comes. So, let's begin with Shadow Man the video game. As a god I step forth upon the writhing, suppurating surface of the Deadside serpent. What sleep is here? What dreams there are in the unctuous coilings of the snake's mortal shuffling? Weapon in my hand, the arcing death blow at the end of all things. The horror. I embrace it. This is the poem Deadside Dreams by Guy Miller, which apparently is what Shadow Man himself mentions when entering Deadside for the first time. Set against the mysterious backdrop of voodoo mythology, Shadow Man puts you in the role of Michael Leroy, English literature student turned hired assassin. Operating within the mephitic, seedy underworld of New Orleans, Mike has the ability to cross over at will into Deadside, where he becomes the Shadow Man. The story begins with a dream, a prophetic nightmare vision of Armageddon, the day that the dead rise up and walk the earth, an apocalypse with its origins firmly rooted in Deadside. When Mama Nettie, the powerful voodoo sorceress who created the Shadow Man by forcibly implanting the powerful shadow mask in Mike's chest, dreams of the coming apocalypse, she commands Shadow Man, her only weapon against the coming storm, to stop it from becoming a reality. Destined to carry out Nettie's orders in our world, the life side and dead side, for as long as he is of use to her, Mike must step across the veil into Deadside and ultimately venture into the place where all killers and madmen are consigned when they die, the Asylum. The future of humanity is in the Shadow Man's hands, in the game that plunges you into the darkly beating heart of all that is, has ever been, and ever will be evil. I believe this is as good as an introduction as you can make for Shadow Man, because despite its age and despite the limitations of the consoles and the PCs when the game came out, the developers clearly had ambition, clearly tried to do what they could with what they had in their hands, and the result is very much what this description gives us. So enough of this. Before we head over to the strategy guide, however, we need to take a look at the map. As I've mentioned already, I do think Shadow Man is much like the first Metroid game. Inside the game you will find no map to show you the way, to show you where you need to go, where you have been and such. Instead, you had this little sketch of the game's layout. It may look a little bit convoluted, but if you begin at the top right, called where the life side, where the game begins, at the Bayou Paradis, you can see how you proceed through the game. You can meet Nettie, you can get the shotgun and the handgun, of course, and Luke's bear in Bayou Paradis. And using the bear, you can cross over to the Marrow Gates. There you can see how the paths of shadow stretch across the surface of Deadside, each waypoint marked by a different coffin gate. And each time you open one, there are more branching paths you can find. And since I'm recording this when I've already visited the playrooms, you can notice them here, on the asylum, over here. And I see that I haven't gotten the flambeau yet. Flambeau? I don't know how you pronounce it. I'll call it flambeau. Because it's what I don't know, it sounds better to me. I should have gotten it already. I already have opened a level 5 coffin gate, which means I should have the flambeau already. On this chart you can also notice that in the asylum, Jack the Ripper has already created all that Legion required of him. The Cathedral of Pain, the engine block, the Great Dark Engine, as Legion called it. And here, from the Cathedral of Pain, you can see the schism traces, which lead over to the live side, to where the 5 reside. Schism is a really interesting term to use. I think it's the best word they could have used. You see, schism is derived from the Greek word schisma, which is a tear in the fabric, a fabric of reality, as it were. And through these schisms, the dark souls cross over from the dead side through a tear in reality through to the life side, where they empower the 5, the heralds of the apocalypse, and the end of all things at the hands of Legion. And now we cross over to the official acclaimed strategy guide. You may be wondering, where do I get all these? Well, if you buy this game from GOG.com for the PC, you get all kinds of digital goodies, all the things we've seen up until now, the manual, the little chart, and the strategy guide, as well as the soundtrack to the game, are available. When you buy the game, you get them for free. In digital form, but hey, it's easier for me to make a video when using these PDF files instead of taking screenshots of the manuals and all the guides using my cell phone as I had to do with the Eternal Darkness supplements. As you can see, this guide came out before the Dreamcast version. Well, the Dreamcast version is pretty much a port for the PC, so nothing lost there. As you can see, there is a very nice artwork back here, and the table of contents. We'll be looking at all of these contents, well, as much of it as it pertains to the game. We don't need to see the entire strategy guide and what we need to do. I won't be using it, to be honest, as the game, I think, as far as I've played until now, has a pretty straightforward path. You can, if you have your eyes peeled and make mental notes of everything, you can find your way pretty easily. We're gonna skip how to use this guide because, well, it's a guide. We all know how to use a guide, and we're gonna proceed to Chapter 1, the characters and the backstory of the game. We can see Shadow Man reading a Edge magazine with Turok 2 on the cover. Shadow born at the confluence of worlds to move between. Deadside partly living, the asylum of the heart where the darkness is manifest at the edges of reason. What sleep is here? What dreams there are in the unctuous coiling of the snake's mortal shuffling? Gun in hand, the arcing death blow at the end of all things. The horror, the horror. As you can understand, this is a remixed version of Guy Miller's poem we read earlier, and let's see how the guide introduces us to the game. It's voodoo, that smell in the air, that feeling beneath your skin, that taste in the back of your mouth, and the effect it has on the way you view the world, or worlds. In this game there are 2 worlds, live side and dead side, and as Michael Leroy, a lonely man living in the dark underbelly of New Orleans, you will venture to both. The powerful voodoo priestess Mama Nettie has a dream, or is it a nightmare, that prophesies Armageddon, the coming of the apocalypse where the dead will walk the earth. As Shadow Man, you are Nettie's only weapon strong enough to prevent the awaiting destruction. By forcibly implanting the Shadow Mask into your chest, Nettie imbues you with the power to slip into Deadside, the only place where you can exist as Shadow Man, an immortal voodoo warrior with incredible magical powers. It's up to you to enter Deadside and venture towards the place where killers spend the rest of their days, the Asylum. And it's time for us to meet our protagonist, Mike Leroy. Mike Leroy is our hero's real-world persona. Originally from New Orleans, 32-year-old Mike is a victim of his own weaknesses. Having flunked his courses and spent his remaining college fund on drink and gambling, this failed English literature student worked as a taxi driver in Chicago, keeping his failure a secret from his family. That was until one day in 1991 when one of Mike's passengers was executed in a gang-style killing, leaving $20,000 in the back of his taxi. Well, from what I see, this is where the game corrects what I remembered from Michael's backstory. Let's see then. Mike took the money and returned home, paying for his little brother Luke's much-needed operation and showering lavish gifts upon his family with his newfound wealth. Unfortunately, though, the gang was onto Mike and tracked him down to New Orleans, issuing death threats against him. In desperation, Mike sought out a Bokor, a voodoo priest, to give him protection against the gang's attacks. This worked, but far too well. The gang decided to call in their dead by staging a drive-by shooting on the car in which Mike and his family were traveling. Mike's parent and his brother were killed, but somehow Mike survived. Upon recovering from a coma and near-fatal injuries, Mike lost his memory and was drawn into the New Orleans underworld by the Bokor, the secret price for his protection being a curse on Mike that made him the Bokor's zombie slave. Working under the pseudonym Zero, the amnesiac Mike acted as a hitman for the Bokor, unaware of his true identity. One night, Mama Nettie, a powerful but dying voodoo priestess, stormed into the Bokor's bar, the Wild at Heart. Taking Mike into the back room, she summoned her remaining powers to forcibly implant the Mask of Shadows, a powerful voodoo artifact, into Mike's chest to turn him into the Shadow Man, the supreme zombie warrior slave now under Nettie's control. By the time of the video game, Nettie has regained her powers and taken the Bokor's soul, leaving the Wild at Heart in Mike's ownership. Mike has regained something too, his memory, which now torments him. As the immortal Shadow Man under Nettie's control, he cannot end his suffering simply. Until he can break Nettie's spell, he is forced to obey her commands, and must somehow seek atonement for his sins. Now this piece of the backstory explains quite a bit regarding how Michael reacts to what Nettie tells him to do. He does it because he has no choice. She has power over him. As Michael Leroy, you are the main protagonist of this game. Your mission is to search Liveside high and low for information leading to Legion and his minions. You're free to explore and interact with anyone and anything in Liveside, the world of the living. By focusing on the teddy bear once owned by your late brother Luke, you're able to slip into the seedy underworld known as Deadside. Once in Deadside, you become Shadow Man, an amazingly powerful immortal endowed with voodoo powers. As Shadow Man, you must track down and destroy the most notorious killers ever known to man. With an amazing arsenal at your disposal and two comrades offering you guidance and information, you are the only one who can stop this seemingly inevitable Armageddon. I believe this is a very good way to introduce the player into the game. It pumps you up and prepares you for what comes next. And so we move on to Shadow Man. The Shadow Man is Mike's alter ego, the undead walker between the worlds. The Shadow Men of ancient times were African warriors blessed by the gods with supernatural powers to protect their native tribes, emanating from the spiritual plane known as Deadside, the place where everyone, without exception, goes when they die. With the advent of slavery, the lineage of the Shadow Men was broken and almost died out. In the 18th century, the powerful voodoo priestess Mama Nettie crafted the Mask of Shadows, enlisting the reluctant aid of the New World gods, Les Mystères, to empower the wearer of the mask to access the supernatural might of the Shadow Men of the past. From then on, there would be only one Shadow Man in existence at any given time, but the united powers within the mask would make him the mightiest voodoo champion ever seen in this world, or the next. Certainly powerful enough to keep the forces of Deadside at bay. And that explains why Shadow Man is the only one who can break open the Govi and take the dark souls contained within. At the time of the game, there have been 3 previous Shadow Men. It seems like the guide is... It looks like the guide is a bit badly scanned here. We cannot see the bottom line. Although we do know the name of the first one. It's Maxims and James who left the prophecy, which we find in the Chamber of Prophecy. Someone called Cardinal and Jacques Boniface. However, where the previous owners wore the mask on their faces to access its powers, Mike Leroy, the current Shadow Man, is in the unfortunate position of having the mask implanted within his chest, making him truly a slave to it and to Mama Nettie. At night, and in the dead side, the mask emerges glowing from within his chest, turning Mike into the Shadow Man, the immortal voodoo warrior, the walker between the worlds, zombie astral, taker of souls, Lord of Deadside. And now we move on to the artist of this beautiful sculpture in Mike's chest, Mama Nettie. Nettie is the powerful voodoo priestess who created the Mask of Shadows and therefore controls the bearer of it. Although Nettie appears to be in her mid-20s, she is in fact centuries old, her soul simply inhabiting the body of a young woman whom unfortunately became involved in Nettie's schemes. Although incredibly powerful, Nettie cannot travel to Deadside, the world of the dead, which is why she needs her assistant, Jaunty, and particularly the Shadow Man, a warrior that can cross between the worlds and fight battles in Deadside for her. There is another side to the relationship that exists between Nettie and the Shadow Man. Shadow Man must get romantically involved with Nettie on a regular basis, giving his shadow powers to her in order to sustain her youthful form. Indeed, at the beginning of the game it is evident that something has been going on in the bedroom above the Wild at Heart. Perhaps this is why Shadow Man was drained of shadow powers when we start the game. And of course we have to build it up again, collecting the Dark Souls. Nettie is the Bayou's resident clairvoyant and witch doctor, all wrapped up in one. It was she who had the vision of the apocalypse that caused her to call upon the services of Mike Leroy. Since she's the main reason you're in this mess in the first place, she'll give you bits of advice in between the various stages of your quest. She'll also give you the only two material possessions you own, your gun and your late brother Luke's teddy bear. You don't have to say thanks, just be sure not to make her mad. And here's Jaunty. Jaunty is Nettie's assistant in Deadside. Jaunty is the unfortunate victim of a kidnapping, an occult experiment that went somewhat awry, and a botched deal with a voodoo priestess. Walking back from the pub late one night in his hometown of Belfast, Jaunty was passing the university and decided to stop to take a small, break. Unfortunately for him, a group of students dabbling with the occult kidnapped him and ritually sacrificed him as a part of their experiment. Jaunty would have been condemned to an eternity in Deadside had it not been for Mama Nettie, who spoke to him from across the veil and convinced him to join her, to be her eyes and ears in Deadside. The reward? A new body, and a chance to live again. The specifics of the deal could not have been thoroughly worked out, for Jaunty appears in Deadside as a combination of a serpent with a skull for a head. His real-world body is that of a disfigured dwarf. In either incarnation, Jaunty is not a pretty sight, and is not much of a fighter either. Hence, Mama Nettie's need for the Shadow Man. At the time of the game, Jaunty is in Deadside, awaiting the Shadow Man and guarding the Marrow Gates, the entrance to the world of the dead. Jaunty is a funny, as in peculiar funny, little demon with a skull for a head and a snake's body. Add to this a charming Irish accent and Jaunty makes quite the endearing rascal. As the only other main character that can walk between worlds, he provides Shadow Man with a few items that Nettie must have forgotten. He also lends a hand from time to time by saving your progress for you, although this last part was probably taken out of the final game because in both the Nintendo 64 and the PC versions you can save at any time. I don't know what happens in the PlayStation version, but I doubt it's different. And here's Luke. Luke is, or was, Mike's little brother. It is his teddy bear that Mike so intensely focuses upon in the live side. Why, is what most people around him would wonder. But as we all know, it's through this teddy bear that Mike is able to melt into that seething pit of death and decay known as Deadside. And I think this is where we will end this video for now. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you next time. Till then, as always, take care.